importance, off he goes to the police. All in their own good time, they send a man along to see whether there's a word of truth in old Franz Muller's story, or whether there's a spot of red paint on our doorstep, and we peacefully asleep in our beds. The man reports that blood has oozed under the front door, spread across the step, trickled down the sides, and soaked into the dust. The police come, burst open the door, and find what? A woman lies at full length upon the floor, dead. So great a quantity of blood has flowed from her head and neck that if she was not killed outright at the time, she had bled to death. Seated in a wooden armchair and half sprawling across the table is a man. He is still in a drunken slumber, his head pillowed upon his bent left arm, the hand of which clutches an empty bottle. His right arm, outstretched before him and resting on the table, points in the direction of the body of the woman. In the man's right hand is a pistol, its muzzle resting on the table. One chamber has been discharged. In the corner of the room, a boy, a stunted, undersized boy, lies on the bare floor. They thought he was dead too, until the police surgeon discovered that he was only suffering from a severe blow on the head, a dislocated leg, and various minor injuries. He was very emaciated and had a number of old bruises, wheals, abrasions, and contusions. It was noticed, too, that the eyes of the woman were blackened, and that her face showed evidences of brutal injury. "Aha!" said the police. "A wife-beater. A scoundrelly brute that assaults children in his drunken frenzy. And now he has gone too far. He has deliberately murdered his wife, and perhaps has fatally injured his son." They reconstructed the crime. The man has come home drunk as usual, bringing with him a bottle of cheap and fiery spirit. He had savagely assaulted the woman, beating her insensible, and had then struck and kicked the boy, finally hurling him across the room, where he had lain, unconscious and half dead. The ruffian had then seated himself at the table to drink. Unfortunately, before he had fallen into this drunken slumber, the unhappy woman had recovered consciousness, and clutching at the table, had raised herself to her knees, and reproached or defied him, or perhaps had begged him to get help for the injured child. His drunken fury blazing forth again, he had snatched the pistol from his pocket and shot her dead. He had then emptied the bottle at a draught and fallen forthwith into a sottish, swinish slumber in which they had found him. Thus the police, and thus was the accusation of wilful murder framed against my father. Nor could a shadow of doubt remain in the mind of any reasonable and unbiased person who heard the impassioned speech of the prosecuting counsel, the Advocate General, who demanded a life for a life, the heaviest of punishments for the foulest of crimes. Certainly there was no doubt in the mind of the judge. How should there be? What would you three have concluded if you had been the three policemen who burst into the room and saw the body of the slaughtered woman lying in a pool of blood that had flowed from a wound caused by a bullet that had severed jugular vein and carotid artery? What would you have concluded if, facing the murdered woman, there sat a man, a noted brute and wife-beater, whose hand clutched the pistol from which the bullet had been fired? "What, I ask you?" insisted Linden, seizing the wrist of Michael Geste in his hot and shaking hand. "Tell me, what?" "I should have said that things looked black against the man," replied Michael Geste. "Very black." "Would you have sent him to the scaffold if you had been his judge?" asked Linden. "Don't know, I'm sure," was the reply. "Probably. Possibly not. Evidence all circumstantial. We have a different system, you know. If a jury brought him in guilty of wilful murder—" "Yes, but it wasn't England, you see," interrupted Linden. "And we don't assume that every villainous criminal is innocent. We leave him to prove that he is, if he can. What would you have done if you had been the judge?" he added.